So we're holding on Amud Samach Gimel. And we've just sort of cleaned up a little bit in our biur of Das Eli and Das Tachtin. We described all the various madregas. But at the moment we're focusing on a categorization of Das Eli and Das Tachtin, Der Prat, which was that the yesh of Das Elyon, the Maili Yesh Lamata Ayin, is, as we said, was like we said before, that the Ein Sof is the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti. Yesh Amiti is Atzmus Ein Sof. And the Ayin, which is Ayin Mamish, is bottle, which is a reference to the Ein Sof Shlipnei Atzimtzum. He then said that Das Tachtin is the Pshat, the Ayin of Das Tachtin is Malchus the Ein Sof. And the Yesh HaNivra is the Eir HaKav. And that encompasses the entirety of also the Shtalshlus after the Tzimtzum. Yeah? So now the process of the biur is going to be to explain to a greater extent the inyan of Eir HaKav, which is our new Yesh HaNivra, and the Yesh HaNivra, which is Ayin, is the Malchus of Ein Sof. And remember, let's not forget, what is the whole reason we're doing this? Because this is the whole Arichas HaBiur to explain why did Hashem want to create the world in Midas Hadin. And to explain why Hashem wanted to create the world in Midas Hadin, we got to the point where we said that in order to have a Yesh HaNivra, there needs to be a Tzimtzum in the Oir. Till now, or earlier rather, in Lulav Arava, the Tzimtzum in the Oir was the Tzimtzum in Zod Atzilus. Zod Atzilus is a Tzimtzum in the Oir, and that enables the Vushim of Malchus, the Kavod Malchus, the Isis Hadibur of Malchus, to be able to be Mailim Master on that Oir, and produce and create Nivroim of Biyah. Now, we're when we talk about Yeshus, Yesh HaNivra, we're not going all the way down to Elam Hazeh Gashmi, or even to the Nivroim Al Yoinim of Elam HaBriya. We're talking about Mamash after the Tzimtzum Arishin, which starts with Ak. So the Eir HaKav, that is the Yesh we're talking about. How do you produce the Yeshus of Eir HaKav? Through the Tzimtzum Ha'Oir. Same notion. Kavod Malchus Chayimir G'Rav Chidaberu. Yeah, so let's see how this, he's now going to explain to a greater extent the inyan of Eir HaKav and how that fits into what we're talking about here. Okay, so Amud Samach Gimel, paragraph beginning Va'inyan Hu. Va'inyan Hu, K'mishkos B'makim Acher, the Gam HaKav, Imo Yoysu B'bechinas Hispashtus V'amshacha, Mikol Mokim Har Yehu B'bechinas Hiyuli Legabi HaShetach. So Eir HaKav we describe as an Eir, and when we're saying Eir HaKav, if to fit in with how we've been describing things before, the Eir in social Achar Tzimtzum, the Eir HaKav. So this Eir HaKav is the inyan of Hispashtus Amshacha. That's a given. Yeah? But the Eir HaKav is not just what you might think of Hispashtus. When you think of something that's Hispashtus, which here he gives the description as being Shetach. Shetach means just expanse, the spatial expanse. So something Hispashtus that is found to be everywhere. So there's that form of Hispashtus, which is more of a Hispashtus b'poyel. The Kav is more Hispashtus in the context of a hiyuli, of a generative koyach. The potential for expansion. More of a mayon, more of a source, more of a moker for all forms of hispashtus. So the hispashtus, it makes possible the hispashtus. That's it is in a kav is associated with kav is a line which is itself hispashtus from one point to another point.
Right.
But what it wants to emphasize here is the manner in which the hispashtus erakav is achieved is primarily as a hiyuli, as a generative koyach, rather than sort of the finished, the actual hispashtus.
So would this be comparable to a mayon that takes from the stone, which is like its bakasa parsa, so to speak, and it's got in it the potential for many rivers to come out of it. It isn't the big rivers, but it's something like that.
Look inside. It's going to explain. I'm just give it a chance to breathe. The erakav is not a hamshacha pratis, meaning that it's specifically one type of thing rather than another. It is the notion of hamshacha, but the manner of that hamshacha is not entirely defined in the erakav. That there is a hamshacha min hamashpia l'makabel min ha'elyon el ha'tachton, the inyan of hispashtus v'israchavus, that is the erakav. But the manner of the hispashtus, the manner of the hamshacha, is not really the inyan of the erakav. Erakav is much more, you might call it general, or like he prefers to say here, it's much more hiyuli. Do'ifani proti hamshachis hein boy behelem beloy begilui. In the erakav, the various manners in which things are nimshekh to various aspects of the nivroim, and here we're talking about nivroim in the context as we've described it, all the way from Ak to Tzilus, Chuli. They are the specifics as it relates to the various madreges is behelem. The begilu yurak eiran nimshach mispashid milmayla lamata. It has a very sort of general notion of being the form of hamshacha, but the way that hamshacha can be particularized and appropriated in various different ways in different places, that remains behelem. One is required to say that when it comes to the hamshacha, it has some element. It's not completely. This is going to be a point which is going backwards and forwards a little bit in the course of things. We can't make it so hiyuli and so general and just the notion of hamshacha, and not really the actual hamshacha, not an individualized, not a specified hamshacha.
Or that what is specified hamshacha look like?
Specified hamshacha would be the in Ak, the erakav is more begili, and in Eiratzilus it's less begili.
So you got hemshekh being that blah blah blah. That's not what we're talking about. So when we say proteha gili, that's not referring to different middas.
We're first of all saying that the notion of erakav is not the hamshacha is not the hamshacha to chachma of Atzilus or to chesed of Atzilus.
Okay.
It's what facilitates that there should be a hamshacha.
So
the specifics and the tailor-made amount of gilu elikus, which is appropriate for chachma of Atzilus, which is to a greater degree than chesed of Atzilus, is boy behelem, not begilu.
So it does have that.
Yes, so it has that. Everything the erakav is the sherish of all things hamshachis. But so even though ima yoyse bechinas hispashtus v'hamshacha, it's bechinas hiyuli lagabi hashetach. Relatively speaking, it's like a hiyuli and not like a shetach. It's not got all of. It's not the erakav is not just seen as a collection of various different individual hamshachas to various different madregas. The individuation, the sort of the specificity of the way the Eir HaKav could be nimshach to a particular place, another place is not apparent. What is apparent is the notion of Hamshach. However, one thing that is a given is that there's an awareness of Maila and Mata, because the very notion of Hamshach is that there's an Elyon, there's a Tachtin, the Mashpia to the Makabel. So you acknowledge that in the Madregas Elyonis, there's a Gilui Elikus to a greater degree, and to the Madregas Anamuchis, the lower Madregas, there's less of a Gilui Elikus. So we can't just turn Eir HaKav into entirely into the notion of a Hiyuli, such a generative koich that is completely detached and separate from the pratim, because by definition the Eir HaKav must have a consciousness, must have a self-awareness of the distinction between Maila and Mata. So the hechrich lima she'ein ha-Maila v'ha-Mata shavim, the imloi kein ein zeh b'chinas hamshachim hu-Maila l'Mata. That's a given, otherwise it's not Eir HaKav. I know the b'chinas ha-Mata shaboy ha'eir metzumsum yesa, the ein b'chinas gilui kol kach maybe Maila shaboy. In the Eir HaKav, the Madregas Elyonis, there's more of a gilui, and then the lower Madregas is less of a gilui. Me'ach hashish by Maila Mata, be'hech hashish by Gam, b'chlolas hamshachosi, b'chinas Madregas Pratius. So it must be that he has all these Madregas Pratius. The hein pratia Madregas ish ba Makabel, and these are all the various different Madregas that you'll find in the Makabel. The Makabel being the Kli HaChochma, the Kli Abina, the different Kalim. That's the Makabel. The Kli is the Makabel. The Klol is Hamshachas HaKav, Hula'achash Kvashir Ba'atzmi B'Koyach, Eich Shayir Eifen Metzias HaElmis. This is the Lashon Deis Chaim. After the Tzimtzum, you have the Hamshachas HaKav, which is a result of being Shir Ba'atzmi B'Koyach. He sort of estimated, the Eibishter estimated himself, B'Koyach, at least in potentia, how it should be the Metzias HaElmis. The Eir HaKav is hardwired. This is the Gilui of this Shir Atzmi B'Koyach, of this expectation of how the worlds are going to transpire. So it's got all of these prati madregas, and it's contained it. That's how the kav is nimshach, because it has the ingrained in it, in its program. It's programmed to be nimshach to each and every madrega lefi madregosi. Hainu lahoe b'chol olam v'olam k'vi hashar shayiv atzmas. In each olam there should be the amount of gilui elikus which was estimated to be appropriate for that war, that olam. V'lochein b'hamshach zakavu b'chnas hamshachim imayla lamata v'yesh by kol prati ifani hamshachis. So it has it, ingrained in it. We're not saying that the Eir HaKav is a yuli, and it has nothing to do with the hamshachis pratis. No. The Eir HaKav is hamshachim imayla lamata. Hence, it understands Maila and it understands Mata. More than that, it understands every single madriga. This Eir is nimshach lefi erech each and everything madriga. Classic. This is Eir HaMamala Kalamim, right? It's nimshach to every single thing. But even though that is the case, we're not denying that. That aspect of Eir HaKav is behelim. V'hainu shekol haprotim sheboi heim bebechinas pshitus adayin. These particular protim, what does it mean behelim? What is the difference between behelim and begilui? When it's behelim and it's nichlo and it's part of Eir HaKav, there it's bebechinas pshitus. Doesn't have all of the containment, all of the definition, all of the characteristics of the Oyer, which is ultimately going to be nimshach into this kli. So the way bina will be nimshach, the bina of Atzilus will be nimshach from the Eir HaKav into the klei habina, the kli habina. When it's in the Eir HaKav, it's behelim, which means it's pshitus. It's not, behelim means it doesn't scream bina. all that screams is kav. And kav is all of these madregas proteus, all of these protea ha'oir, but in a madrega of helen, a madrega of pshitus. But loy bebechinas his chalkus madrega is proteus. Kim kulam bebechinas his achtus viskalus mamish at shehu bebechinas madrega achas levad. It's like only one madrega. Madrega of erakav. V'lochein ikrihi yuli legabi hashetach. And that's why we consider, we treat the erakav to be like a hiyuli, from which emanates all these madregas proteus, rather than a shetach, an already fully defined aspects which it's going to be nimshach into. Shu b'chinas yischalkus nikeres b'chinas madregas proteus. So kol zman is erakav. It appears like everything's the same.
So is it like instead of having, for example, if the moshul is O, many streaks of light, each going to a different olam, you have one bolt of light which has in it the potential for all these different streaks that will come to the olam.
So that's like the moshul with the when we consider the Erev Atzilus to be pashut, and the tzir is only coming mitzad the kelim, right? The keli shapes the oir into that shape.
Right.
So this is what he says next. Because he says, even when the Eidos are bislapshus bekelim, shaygam ha-Eidos bislapshus bekelim, hariyim b'chinas ischalkus mitzad ha-kelim. The Eir is not inherently mechulak from the mechaveri. Each Eir is not fundamentally defined as Eir ha-Chachma and Eir ha-Bina. The ischalkus they have to be in the sphere of Chachma and sphere of Bina is mitzad ha-kelim. Shezeu Chachma v'zeh Chesed. V'mayoshin is chalkus shemitzad hakelim nikno b'hem, and this distinctiveness, which it acquires from the kelim, is not acquired by them. It doesn't become identified with it. B'chinas kinyan atzmi chuli, v'komokim harim pelim k'fi oifn hakelim. But nevertheless, they function in a manner in which the kelim dictate. V'gam nispoil il, like we explained above, v'mayosim pshutim. Even though they are pshutim, the gabi hakelim, they still have an element, an aspect of chachma and chesed. Elash nikroim pshutim the gabi hakelim. Avol gam pshitas ha'oiros hu adayin b'chinas metzias mugbul the gabi etzem hakav. These oiros of Atzilus, which is the madrega proteus, they may be poshut the gabi hakelim, the gabi etzem hakav. They're b'chinas metzias. Shu poshut gam b'chinas pshitas ha'oiros. Because the Eir HaKav transcends even what we describe as the Pshitas HaEiris. And that is the very nature of a Hiyuli, that it's always detached and transcends the thing which it is generating. That's our first thing we've explained about Eir HaKav. This Eir HaKav, which is going to be the yesh of Das Tachtin. Or even Das Elin, right? This is Das Tachtin. The ayin of Das Tachtin is Malchus the Ein Sof. But this Eir HaKav is already B'chinas Yesh.
Is the Kav the Eir HaKav, or it's something that's Nesa as a Eris?
Oh, sorry, I got it wrong. We said that the Eir HaKav is the ayin of the ayin of Das Tachtin. Beg your pardon. The Eir HaKav retains this element of this is the Malchus the Ein Sof. This is still with Pshitas. B'chinas ayin.
Oh yeah.
That's what we said at the end of the Malchus.
Is the Kav the Eris, or is it something that is like holds a Eris? What's the combination of the Eris? Is this Kav the Eris?
That's what we said.
And what is this Pneumius level of the Kav that we just mentioned?
But there's a transition. There's a transition from when in the Kav that the Reishis Gila Kav is B'chinas Pshitas.
Right.
It's only once it's Nimshach in Madrigas Proteus that it becomes defined and distinguished from each other. But it's more appropriate to think about the kav. It's more appropriate to think about the kav not as the sum total of all of these hamshachas and hispashtusim, but rather as the hiyuli. And there's this sort of a phase. The kozman, the erakav, the kozman, all these madregas proteus are in the erakav. They're bechinas pshitus adayin. They're biskalus. They're not defined. It's only once they're nimshech in the kelim that they're begeder his chalkus protim.
Is there a mashal for this?
There will be. I don't want to get to that yet.
Okay.
The fact that he says that the covers the Yuli, it's another way of saying that the Eris come to Yora.
Which iris?
The Eris that come from the Kavan to Atzeret.
So let's just be more specific. The sphere of the Eir HaChachma is going to be Mitsuya. Why?
Because if it was Pashut, then it wouldn't be a Yuli, because a Yuli is an undefined matter which can then be changed into a more specific matter. But if it is always going to be pure and simple, Pashut, then it won't be Yuli. It should be the same.
You're just adding, saying that the Eiris are not be'etzim pshutim, they're only pshutim legabi akelim, be'etzim them mutziyarim, to an extent.
In the Kav they're Pashut.
Yeah. So you're agreeing with
Yeah.
this. Yeah. It's emphasizing that point, yes. Okay. Weiter. Wenn ich masche etzem hakav u'bechinas hiyuli, yesh lo imar, dainu klolis hamshachas hakav mireishis haschalosi ad soif siyumei. Bebechinas malchus ta'atzilus u'bechinas nehi. So this, what we're saying about the kav, is not just the way it is, Bereshis Hiskalusai, but Klolas Hamshachosai, all the way down to Malchus Ta'atzilus. The Yoisha Da'ak, Shemistayim Be'ekiv Da'asiyah, Hu Bebechinas Hiyuli. Dima Yoish Shemimenu Nimshachim Ha'oiris Ba'o'ilam Ishlamayla Me'atzilus Uba'atzilus, Ba'esas Firishakol Oilam Ba'o'ilam Bebechinas Higulim Be'yosha, Umeir Lechol Oilam Ba'o'ilam Lefi Erkoi, B'chein b'chol sfira me'esas sfiras b'chol echad v'echad l'fi erkoi v'lochein nikro kav hamidah. Sorry, I'm reading this, it's a long sentence. Shemoided medidas ha'oid b'chol oilam b'chol sfira eich u'ma ye'oifen gilu ha'oid b'hem. So even though the hamshachas hakav is all the way through Seder Shtalshlus, and it's from the Eir HaKav, which is nimshach, all the madregas protius, in the esas sfiras of each oilam, and it's mainly each oilam, the fi erech ha'oilam.
What's the Yesha Da'ak? We said at the beginning of the sentence.
The Yesha is the yashrus, the straightness of ak.
Meaning?
Means the erakav.
Okay.
Right. And it gives everything the fi erekoi, and that's why it's called kav hamidah. A midah is a measuring stick, right?
Right.
It's a measuring stick. Shemayda medidas ha'oid b'chol oilam b'chol sfira. It determines how much of the aim. This is the aim of Malakal, means we understand it. Mikol Mokaim, but nevertheless, these are all effects of the kav. But hakav atzmoi eine bebechinas midah. Whilst the kav is able to measure other things, it itself is not measured. She'eine nitfes ba'atzmoi ba'amedida shemoidit. It does not become defined and calculated. We don't calculate it according to the things it calculates. And it's going to give a mashal. U'kumoy aderech mashal. Amas habinyan. The amas habinyan. The amas habinyan is the measuring stick of is the sort of the
Ruler?
Yeah, like the measuring tools for the binyan. So, the measuring stick itself does not become part of the measurements of the building itself. It's just with it, you're able to measure the length and the breadth.
Can also be measured though. Can also be measured.
Yeah, but it's not nitfas
Right.
in the measure of the building.
Fine.
You can measure something else without being its measure. Like when we so it measures everything and gives it its definitions, distinctions. Or maybe everything is determined by the Eirakav. It's not the sum, it's not affected, it's not determined, it's not defined by the things that it measures. Maybe Moshla Gashmi, Hanal, the Masabini, Shumediko Shetachabinian, Beirich Berechev, who Atmin about Begada Shetachabinian. Like when we, like what we talk about a lot of times, the difference between Koyach Mugbal and Koyach Magbil. You yourself can be Mugbal, or you can be Magbil. The power to be Magbil is not necessarily an indication of yourself being Mugbal. Being Magbil something else. Re'ei, no?
Was the end where the man was?
Right at the end, yeah. Okay, we're going to have another view. Let's get the whole thing in and then we'll discuss it. It's a lot of material.
Does that much work for you?
Can we get? I want to make progress, and then I prefer to talk about it. I admit, needs more. You need more help with this, but I hope to give it towards the end when we have the whole thing in place. You create the structure, and then we'll talk about it. Okay.
Okay.
But halt cut. Don't just wait for the end.
Plot.
So this can be understood, like the way it's explained somewhere else, by way about piping. Shishchot sfira tzinoid v'kav miyuchad shederech hatzinoid ba'akav ahu nimshach ha'ir b'chol sfira sfira. So you can imagine that the spheres receiving the hemshekh from Eirakav, and they each have sort of a pathway, a tzinoid, to receive the hashpah, the hemshekh from the kav. Like a pipe that draws from a large river, and from that larger pipe you have then smaller pipes, which can then be draw the water into small kalim which gather at the end of each small tzina. If you would just take directly from the tzina hagadol, it would knock all the kalim over, right? The rush would be too much. So the method is by having a big tzina and then smaller tzinas, and gradually you can slow down the flow, and it can be beneficial to receiving the water. So you don't draw from the big pipe, you draw from the smaller pipes. The kav can be seen like a large pipe. And it's nimshach from Elyon to Tachtoin, from Eir and Seif. But from the Etzem HaKav itself, you wouldn't be able to draw into the kalim of the Esespheres in any of the Olamis. She'enam yechin l'kabel me'etzem hakav. Directly from etzem hakav, there won't be too much of an oil. Kimati notice v'hakav meshachim l'chos sphera, but rather through the smaller pathways that are specific to each and every sphere. Ula zois. Even though these iris, which are hemshekh to the Esespheres, through these pathways, are already mutzumtzum. They already have a middle and gvul. And that is all determined by the kav itself, how each and every sphere, how much gilu elikus it should have. The kav is just a measure of them. That through the kav, the oy becomes measured and determined how much for each and every sphere. But the kav itself is not a midah. The fisha ain't a nimshach ba'atmin ba'asfiris, because it itself is not nimshach into the spheres. The era kav directly is not nimshach to the spheres. It doesn't have that medida. Ulefiza yish leimar the bekav ha'emtsoi nimshach. This is a bracket. The lefiza the bekav ha'emtsoi nimshach ha'ein me'etzem hakav. V'zeu yisri ma'ilus kav ha'emtsoi al beis hakavim. So when we always talk about, Yaakov is the Briach HaTichin, and Tiferes Oila Ad HaKeser, the Kav Emtsoi, Das, Tiferes, Yisoid, of the Tzir of the spheres, when you have Tzad HaYimin and the Tzad HaSmol, Tzad HaYimin, Choch Mechesed, Netzach, and then on Tzad Shmol you got Bina, Gvura, and then Hoid, and then Kav Emtsoi. So he says the Shleimar. That is what's so special about Kav Emtsoi. The Kav Emtsoi is taka. The middle is the Kav. Is the Tzina Hagadol. Everything else gets its branches out into the sides, but the middle gets the Eira Kav, the Etzem HaKav. And then he writes.
The Kav isn't air. The Kav just defines the air.
It's true. So what that means is
maybe you could say
he's going to explain what that means in a second.
Have four pipelines. You come here.
But look what he says though, and this is a beautiful bracket. Achakach matzosi biur maima hazoyav vayishvini yiskol abdi shekein kosav. So the Rebbe Rashab says, I then found in this biur, in the biur hazoyav, the Mittler Rebbe, exactly as I'm saying, the toidu lokel shinchani b'derech ha'emes. Thank God I've been led in the correct path. I was happy that he came up with this idea. And then he found that in the Bir Azayah.
Which is Kav
Hamtsoi. 1 second. We've just said it's not possible, like you said, to be Nimshech on Etzem Hakav. It's gonna knock all the pots over, right? How can the Kalim of Das, of Tiferes and Yisoid are able to be Makabel from Etzem Hakav? Spoiler Sheklos Amshach Hakav Yishbi Mailu Matu. שבחינת מטה שבו מצומצם יסחלי ובקו אמצעי מבוא מוקם אחר שאין בו ישחקוס מיילו מטה כי מתחיל המשכוס יעצוי סיום היו בשווה היינו מצד בחינת פנים יסקב מצד בחינת פנים יוסי באמס אין בו בחינת ישחקוס כלל. Let's not get into that. Saying that not only it wasn't that the question wasn't how can it be makabel from Erakav, how can Erakav be good enough for the Kav Emtsoi? Kav at least we know has Mailu Mata. And the Kav Emtsoi is the same all the way through. There's no tzimtzum. So he says that in the Mailu Mat is in Chisenis HaKav. The fact is Mailu Mat is Pnimis HaKav. V'nimtzum movin. The fiyah now, the Chlolos HaKav v'chinas Yuli. What it wants you to take away, what's the nimtzum movin? The nimtzum movin of it all is the Kav, Chlolos HaKav should be treated like a Hiyuli. Yeah.
What is Chisenis HaKav here?
Don't get into that Haschalkus at the moment. Klolos HaKav, when we talk about Kav, for the purpose of our context over here, Klolos HaKav is B'chinas Hiyuli, meaning to say what? It doesn't have all the madrigas protius with which it's associated. It has a notion of milo matter, but it's not as if it's just a container for various different oiris. And when it's nimshach to that, Nadrig gives it that, does that. No. It's an oir poshut. It's an oir poshut. Everything in it is bipshitas. But it's a hiyuli. And it knows its function is to be meir chol oilam ba'oilam lefi inyani. So when it reaches in oilam atzilus, it's meir begilui in azayifim. When it reaches in bria, it's meir in azayifim. Each madriga the way it's needed. Let's just finish this small bracket. V'gam yish loimad ayna b'chinas reishis akav t'bereish am shachosu b'chinas hiyuli l'gabi hashetach hainu k'shemislabish b'chinas parts of ak chuli v'ayim ashkol d'imazah kol anena rishon gimel probably should mean be rishon base.
So there's something called the shetach which isn't the kav.
Hold on a second. We haven't finished holding the thought.
Haven't started.
So the yesh loima here.
Makes no sense.
The yesh loima here. That it's specifically in the reishis akav where we consider it a hiyuli, meaning when it's mislabish in the parts of ak, of adam kadmi.
Which is the first.
Which is his reishis.
After.
Yeah. So, what do you want to tell us from all of this? I'm only going to do one more paragraph. Promise you.
I don't believe you.
I get a bit carried away sometimes. Umikol zeh muven, masha kav nikra ayin legabi esesfiris hanetzalim. Now we can understand why the kav is considered an ayin vis-a-vis the esesfiris of the netzalim, esesfiris of atzilus. Hein legabi akelim, hein legabi ha'oiris. Fishu bechinas hiyuli legabi ha'oiris hanetzalim. Ubechinas bli midugvul. So the relationship between the spirits of Atzilus and the Irakav is a relationship of where it sees it as an ayin. It can call it ayin because it's poshet legabov. V'lochein kol b'chinas ha'iskalus be'eses spherois hu al yedei akav. When there is a hiskalulus, a coming together of different spirits in Atzilus, that is all achieved through the kav. Because the spirits themselves are machuluk. They're distinct and separate. They're mitzuya. If you want to have a chibur of different keiches, it has to come from the keich elyon, the kav, where everything's b'pshitzis. If you want to have a scalus of small and yamin, shu'in scalus v'yichudim shkol ha'eris hamistafim mikeset ha'ak ad malchus ta'atzilus. Anything that it talks about, when it talks about a scholars of different madrigas, or even when you want to remove the oir from one kli and put that same oir into a different kli, which we call achlifu duchsaihu. Comes on derech mitzvah sachanot? No? Shesh misatfil, no? Achlifu duchsaihu, yeah. That's where it comes up usually the first time you come across it. It's all ayidei akav. U'kamayim ma'antu the kashi loin u'miyachid loin chuli. Like we say before Shabbos in the Pasach Liyol, you are the one who ties everything together and brings it into a union. Begin the ant milgav chuli, and that's when does that happen? When you're there. And that's why through it it's possible for there to be the inyan of Iskalus. So this is the one side of the story. We're not going to do the other side of the story yet. So the Eir HaKav, we're trying to figure out what is this Eir HaKav. The Eir HaKav is mitzad echad, the ayin of the yesh of the Ne'etzalim. I want to call them yesh, but in the das, this new das tachtim which we're describing, which we introduced at the end, in the middle of Amud Samach Gimel, we said Bechinas das Tachtoin, Bechinas Ein Seif Hamatz. This was all an explanation of these lines. So if you go back now to Samach Gimel, the paragraph that starts with over there Klal, and we're talking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, 8 lines from the bottom.
Okay, yeah.
I just want to read this again now.
Bechinas
Yeah, Bechinas das Tachtoin, hu Bechinas Ein Seif Hamatzil, Ela Ne'etzolim. V'hainu, Bechinas Gilui Hakav. Shu gam kim Bechinas Malchus Da'atzilus Techlolus. Uki Yudua, Da'atzilus Techlolus, Bechinas Ha'ir Ein Seif Shlifnei HaTzimtzum. V'gilui Hakav, hu Bechinas Malchus Da'atzilus Techlolus. Chuli, K'mesh Goz Mokim Achim. Kshem Shu Bechinas Malchus Da'atzilus HaProtis, hu Bechinas Ein Shel Yesh HaNever Chuli Kanal. K'mei Kim Bechinas Malchus Da'atzilus HaKlolis. Hu Bechinas Ha'ayin Shel Yesh HaNetzel. The Netzolim, Gam Bechinas Akshel Maila Me'atzilus. Hayu Bechinas Yesh Legabi Ein Seif. Ach Nikra Adam Debria Techlolus. V'sahavusam hu mit Bechinas Hakav. Shu Bechinas Ha'ayin Shel Yesh HaNetzel. Shnikra Ayin Legabi HaNetzolim. Lo Miboy Legabi HaKelim, Elegam Legabi Ha'eiris Chuli. So everything we explained in this section was to understand how not just Legabi HaKelim, also Legabi Ha'eiris, the Eir Hakav is a Bechinas Ayin. Is considered a Bechinas Ayin, the Ayin of the Yesh of the Netzolim. And so we had to explain that. We had to explain the notion of the Kav is not just like a klal and a prat. So this is how I'm going to explain it to you. You think of something as a klal and a prat. Kol ma, every part of the prat is in the klal, right?
Right.
The klal is only a collection of pratim. Now, it's possible that whilst those pratim are in the klal, they're behelim somewhat. But there's different types of helim. So take, for example, machshava and dibur. Everything a person says is behelim in the machshava, to an extent. Now, it's oftentimes, in ordinary cases, and not in the way that we sort of, the oimek of dibur, just the practical thinking, the pratim of dibur that come out can be traced back to the machshava. There may be more, they're more edel, it's less defined, it's more conceptual. The oisius have got less definition, so you can fit in a lot more. What takes a long time to speak takes a lot less time to think. Yeah, but you would say that machshava is a klal and dibur is a prat, and all those pratim of dibur can be found in the klal. It's not denying that when something's in the klal, because a klal is not just all the pratim. Because if it was all the pratim, it would just be all the pratim. It's not a klal. What is distinctive about the klal? It's the way it's kolol everything. That in sort of one thing is contained many pratim. So you can have that in chokhmah and bina too.
It would be fair to say that bina is a collection of pratim, and chokhmah is a collection of pratim as it is as a klal.
Yeah, bina is not a collection of pratim; it is pratim, and the chokhmah is the klal.
It is the klal,
right? So you have klalu prat. What it wants to tell you over here, we don't know what that is. I think it's right there.
Hello. Very good. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Yeah.
Lovely. Back on Thursday for you.
Cheers.
Take care.
Good work. So what we want to emphasize here with the kav is not like a klalu prat. Why do we not want it to be like a klalu prat? Because a klal to a prat is still mugda, is itself still mugbal. He's not of a different order. It's not fundamentally different.
It's just
It's the same thing in a klolistica form.
okay. You're saying it's ilav olav, so to speak.
The klal is not shoylol protim. A klal,
What does that mean?
a klal doesn't reject the notion of pratim. At the present moment, these pratim are in a manner of klolus, of generality, but it's not. It acknowledges that it's only one small step away from being pratim. So when we talk about the before you have the pratim coming out of the klal, there's a certain inevitability of it, right? There's a certain inevitability of it. They're perfectly able to come out. It's what you might call it's a helam hashayich el agilui. It's a type of helam. When we talk about something that's helam, because in a sense the pratim are bechinas helam in the klal, but it's a helam hashayich el agilui, without too much effort. The moshel we usually give for a moshel for such a thing is if you have a coal that is a light, but it's settled. By blowing on it, the flame will come out, right, of the coals. Now, before you blew on it, the flame was there. It was just behelim. It was kolul in the coal, but through just blowing it without too much of an effort, you were able to be motzi elagilu, because it was a helim which is shaykh elagilu, so it was easy to extract.
It wasn't really a helim, because there was always fire. Just it was the degree and how much fire there was.
There was not an exposed flame.
Right. Okay. Fine.
It would have been warm. You would have felt the warmth, but it wouldn't have burnt something. Going around it. Once you blow it and the flame comes out, it will burn something. So
fine.
It wasn't there, and then it became there. Helam hashayich. You're right. It's so helam hashayich legilu as if it's already there. Right? You already feel the warmth from it.
You just tell me it's not that.
No, but it isn't. There is a moment where it's
right.
Helam, but when you think of a moshel for something which is a Helam, she'ena shaykh lagilui, would be like a stone. The flame in the stone. If you whack the stone hard enough, a flame will come out. But you don't say that cold before you did that. So in a sense, it's like there's a potential for fire in this stone. But at the present moment, there's no fire. The stone is cold. If you put that stone, and what's more so, if you put that stone in water, you're not going to extinguish the flame that it can make. They're two separate things. The stone is like it's got no shaykhs. But it is a hiyuli. It has the potential for fire. So a hiyuli for something is the pshat that it's completely detached from that thing until it's nimshach. It's not the thing. It's not klol. It's not being koiled these pratim. So, but at the same time, a stone is a hiyuli dafka for fire.
And not for anything else.
It's not for milk. Right?
No, you can't milk it.
So Eirakav is a hiyuli for many things. Is a hiyuli for Eirachachma. All of the ambition that Hashem had, all of the Shia Atzmi B'Koyach, everything potentially the Abishah saw in the world, he put into the Eirakav b'hiyuli. So as soon as it's, when it's nimshach into this place, then fine, it's niskala that what? There's a Eira Chochma. But that Eira Chochma of Atzilus, or that Eira Bina and everything, it's not the pshat that it was always inside the Eira Kav as a Eira Chochma. There was no Eira Chochma in the Kav. There was a Hiyuli for Eira Chochma, which admittedly, it's a Hagdora. It's not Pshitas. It's not man. Even a Hiyuli for something is not Pshitas. We're not trying to claim that this is Atzmas Ein Sof. We're trying to claim this is the Ayin of the Yesh HaNetzal, of the Netzalim. So for it to be that level of Pshitas, just like we said before when we said Das Tachting, Ayin doesn't mean Ayin bottle the Gamri, Dvekus, and out of this world. It's Ayin in a Musuk. But it's loy dova. It's not the dova of the thing that is nimshach from it. The yesh is nimshach from it. But it's something, right? We emphasize there had to be something or other. Otherwise, because nothing comes from nothing. Or something doesn't come from nothing. So similarly over here, before we get too carried away and over the top, remember what we're trying to do with Eirakav. We're trying to position it. So on the one hand, we're emphasizing how legabi the net solim. This is pshitas. This is ayin. This is, and that's the nature of the Eirakav. So it's the u-va-Yuli and all that things. So the relationship from the fire that comes out of the stone doesn't look at the stone and say, you're a fiery flame. No, it's not no kesher. But that fire came from that stone. So al derech zeh, the net solim look at Eirakav and they don't understand it's an ayin. They don't understand how they came from such a thing. They're Eira Chachma, they're Eira Bina, they're Mugda, Metsuya, and everything. Like not even the cave in the Eir is about sinners. But the Eirakav is treated like an ayin. It's the ayin of the net solim. Structure, what we're trying to create here. But we're not going to get too carried away because it's only the ayin. It's not ayin. It's not who boya amiti mitzaratzme. We're not going to call it ayin. It's ayin like we talk about the ayin of the yesha amiti of das elyon. But sufficiently ayin that for the net solim's perspective, this is bechinas ayin. That is what we were trying to do over here. Admittedly, it's a shver shtickle to appreciate, but I hope I've done enough to give you that side of the argument. And next year, Be'ez Hashem, we'll be able to put it into perspective within the broader picture of Das Tachtin, Lagabi Das Elyin. And really what we're trying to figure out is the inyan of Tzimtzum. How Tzimtzum is central to achieving all of this. And Tzimtzum is synonymous with Midas Hadin. The more Tzimtzum, the more Midas Hadin, the more Yeshus of the Nivroim and the Netzalim.